The night was colder than usual, the kind of chill that seeps into the bones of a city that sees slowly running out of warmth and homes. In the heart of Manhattan, a young couple stood on the curb surrounded by boxes, waiting for a moving truck that never came. The landlord had sold the building to a private fund 2 months earlier. Everyone was evicted, but they had clung to the hope of finding somewhere else. Until today. Across the skyline, light after light flickered out in once occupied towers. Empty condos glimmered like tombstones in the sky. The for sale signs had become part of the city's landscape, silent markers of an economy that no longer served its people. New York, the city that never slept, now looked tired. It was becoming clear. Home ownership wasn't collapsing, it was disappearing. For decades, the American dream had been built on one image: a house with a yard, a family inside, stability through property. But that image has cracked. What remains is a mirage, a faint reflection of what people thought was security. Housing has transformed from shelter into currency, traded, flipped, packaged into financial instruments, and sold to investors half a world away. And now, as markets tighten, interest rates spike and wages stall, the question isn't can people afford to buy? It's can they afford to live anywhere at all? In cities like New York, Los Angeles and Miami, luxury high-rises remain vacant, bought not to be lived in, but to be held as assets. Meanwhile, ordinary families face record evictions and skyrocketing rents. The contrast is brutal. Wealth piled high in empty towers, and struggle spread across the streets below. For millions, the last home isn't a metaphor. It's literal. It's the last lease they can sign before being priced out of their city, their neighborhood, their life. The housing crisis didn't happen overnight. It evolved quietly, wrapped in complex language, investment opportunity, equity growth, real estate innovation. Behind those words, something darker took root. Wall Street funds began buying entire neighborhoods, not just single homes. They realized the same lesson the oil barons and tech giants had learned long ago: control the supply, and you control the future. In the 2010s, private equity firms like Blackstone and Invitation Homes began acquiring foreclosed houses at record speed. What was once family housing became corporate inventory, and what was once a dream became a subscription. You could live in a home, but you'd never own it. Fast forward to now, and the cycle has matured. Ownership rates among Americans under 35 have dropped to near record lows. Mortgage debt has climbed past levels seen before the 2008 crash. And a growing portion of renters spend more than half their income just to keep a roof over their heads. When housing becomes speculation, it stops being shelter. This is the quiet erosion, the kind that doesn't explode in headlines but in lives. The eviction notice, the rent hike letter, the email that says your landlord has updated pricing to reflect current market conditions. For some, it's just business. For others, it's the breaking point. Tonight, in Brooklyn, an elderly woman locks her door for the last time in an apartment she has called home for 47 years. In San Francisco, a tech worker earning 6 figures sleeps in a van because rent outpaces his paycheck. In Texas, entire communities of manufactured homes are bought out, the land flipped and residents forced to move, not because they did anything wrong, but because their address became valuable. It's not a crisis of construction, it's a crisis of control. The number of housing units keeps growing, yet the number of people who can actually afford one keeps shrinking. The market, once built to meet demand, now exists to serve capital. For investors, real estate has become the ultimate hedge against inflation, a physical asset in a world of digital money. For ordinary citizens, it's the opposite, a relentless chase for something always moving out of reach. And as the dollar weakens, as confidence in the financial system wavers, the demand for hard assets surges. The result? Homes are no longer built for families. They're built for portfolios. The irony is painful. As luxury developers flood cities with new towers, homelessness reaches record highs. As property values soar, birth rates fall because fewer young adults can start families. Entire generations are being priced out of stability, their futures collateralized in a system that profits from scarcity. The streets of New York tell the story best. Vacant luxury condos overlook food banks with lines stretching down the block. Renters fight in courtrooms just to buy another month. And somewhere in a midtown office, a hedge fund algorithm adjusts rent prices in real time, squeezing another fraction of a percent from tenants it will never meet. But what happens when the model breaks? When people can't pay rent and no one can buy, who does the system serve? This is the moment economists have warned about, when real estate becomes so financialized that it stops functioning as housing. A home that sits empty isn't just lost income, it's lost humanity. The next collapse may not begin with a stock chart or an interest rate. It may begin with the simple fact that too many people have nowhere left to go. In many ways, the last home is already here. It's the family holding onto a sublease they can't renew. It's the young professional watching their rent double in 2 years. It's the middle-class couple realizing that selling might be the only way to survive. In past crises, the government stepped in, stimulus checks, moratoriums, bailouts. But this time, the issue is structural. You can't print homes the way you print dollars, and the private sector has no incentive to make housing affordable. Scarcity is profit. The American dream once promised that if you worked hard enough, you could build a life, own a home, and pass something on to your children. But that dream is being replaced by something colder, a permanent renting class, and for many, that realization is only now sinking in. What does it mean to lose something you never truly owned? That's the question echoing through the cities tonight. Behind every eviction, every rent increase, every foreclosure, there's the same story, people being erased from the places they built. Yet somewhere in that erasure, resistance is forming. Communities are organizing, renters are unionizing, cities are experimenting with new models, community land trusts, cooperative housing, public developments that treat shelter as a right, not an asset. They are fighting to reclaim what the market took, the idea that a home belongs to the people who live in it, not the ones who trade it. The first signs of collapse are not buildings falling, but people leaving. And as the exodus grows, cities may have to decide what matters more, investment or inhabitants. The last home isn't just the final chapter of a crisis, it's the turning point. When survival replaces aspiration, and the question isn't how much a home costs, but who still has one. Morning light breaks over New York like a photograph that's been overexposed, too bright, too sharp, too revealing. The streets are quieter than they used to be, not empty, but muted, as if the city itself is holding its breath. It's the morning after another rent protest in Brooklyn. Dozens arrested, hundreds displaced, thousands waiting. For what? No one really knows anymore. The housing market, once a symbol of growth, now mirrors the nation's fatigue. Prices haven't just flattened, they've begun to slide. Investors are withdrawing. The once endless construction cranes stand frozen over half-finished towers, their skeletons outlined against a grey sky. This is the hangover of a decades-long party, and no one remembers who was invited. Across the country, the same scenes unfold. In Phoenix, entire suburbs sit half-built after credit lines evaporated overnight. In Miami, coastal condos flood not from storms, but from vacancy. Whole floors dark, owned by shell corporations that stopped paying maintenance. And in the Midwest, small towns watch as corporate landlords quietly sell off their portfolios, leaving behind hollow neighborhoods and unpaid taxes. It's not just a correction, it's a reckoning. For years, Policymakers treated real estate like an economic engine, an industry too big to fail, too essential to slow down. But the engine has overheated, the gears grind, the pistons seize. And for the first time in a generation, Americans are beginning to question what a home really means. The illusion of perpetual growth has shattered. Housing wasn't infinite wealth. It was a finite resource turned speculative game. And now the pieces are scattered across empty streets, luxury ruins, and families who no longer believe in the system that built them. Economists call this the flattening, a moment when every metric, prices, demand, confidence, begins to drop at once. But that sterile term doesn't capture the human cost. The flattening means a teacher who can't live near her school, a nurse commuting 3 hours from a different county, a retired couple selling their home not out of choice but necessity. The government steps in, as it always does, with plans and packages and new acronyms. Stabilization funds, urban recovery bonds. But no amount of stimulus can recreate faith. You can lower rates, you can print dollars, but you can't rebuild trust in a system that turned homes into chips on a table. For those who still have a place, every knock on the door carries a flicker of fear. Rent increase, property sale, renovation, eviction. It's not just the loss of space, it's the loss of permanence. The belief that tomorrow you'll wake up under the same roof. And for millions already pushed out, home has become a moving target. They drift between relatives' couches, weekly motels, shelters or cars, invisible citizens in the wealthiest nation on earth. They are the quiet majority of the housing collapse, unseen, uncounted, unheard, but something unexpected begins to emerge amid the ruins. Adaptation. People are building new versions of stability, fragile but real. In upstate New York, cooperative housing projects are taking root, owned collectively by their residents. In California, tiny home communities are spreading, built on donated land, powered by solar panels maintained by volunteers. And in Detroit, once abandoned neighborhoods are being reclaimed, not by developers but by the people who refuse to leave. It's small, it's imperfect, but it's happening. For the first time in decades, housing is being discussed not as an investment, but as a right. Scholars call it the post-ownership era, a transformation from property-based wealth to shared living systems. It sounds radical, but so did home loans once. So did suburbia. Every housing revolution begins with disillusionment. Meanwhile, the financial elite sense what's coming. The same firms that once bought entire city blocks are pivoting into farmland, into digital assets, into water rights. They're leaving housing behind, at least for now, because they understand when people can't afford to live, the market itself dies. The system feeds on participation, on millions believing that tomorrow they'll be able to buy, rent, upgrade. But when belief fades, the currency collapses, and so the market begins to turn on itself. Foreclosures rise, rent defaults spike, investors offload properties at losses they swore were impossible. Real estate, once the safest bet in the world, has become the final domino. Through it all, cities transform. Urban cores, once choked by overpricing, begin to empty, not through catastrophe, but migration. People move inland to smaller towns, to cooperative zones, to anywhere they can rebuild lives outside the logic of speculation. A quiet decentralization is underway. And New York, once the symbol of limitless ambition, becomes the symbol of consequence. From a helicopter's view, the city still glows, bridges lit, rivers shimmering, towers gleaming. But zoom closer, and the cracks appear. Boarded windows, unpaid taxes, vacant floors. The facade remains. The foundation crumbles. It's not the apocalypse. It's entropy, the slow unraveling of what was once thought unshakable. And yet, amid that unraveling, there's something almost poetic. The collapse exposes what was hidden, the fragility, the excess, the cost of believing that shelter could ever be infinite. What's left behind isn't just ruin, It's opportunity, the chance to rebuild differently, not through profit, but purpose. Some cities begin experimenting with radical policy shifts, vacant buildings repurposed as public housing, corporate landlords taxed heavily for empty units, rent stabilization programs tied to income rather than market value. They are imperfect, controversial, but necessary. Because the alternative, the continuation of the old system, has already proven fatal. In this new landscape, the last home takes on new meaning. It's not just the last one left standing. It's the last one before change, before the next chapter begins, the end of a cycle and perhaps the start of something more human. A journalist walks through an abandoned luxury tower in Midtown. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass, views of Central Park, but the air smells of dust and stillness. Every apartment is empty, unsold, unoccupied, untouched. He writes one line in his notebook: "This was never built to be lived in." Across the river in Queens, a construction worker finishes another shift at a cooperative housing project. Modest, functional, alive. Children play outside. The walls aren't marble, but they're warm. He wipes the sweat from his forehead and looks toward the skyline, a skyline that once belonged to investors, now fading into the haze. He smiles, because maybe, just maybe, something better is being born. This is how collapses end. Not with explosions, but with rebuilding. The American dream isn't gone. It's changing form. It's becoming smaller, slower, less about ownership and more about belonging, less about square footage, more about shared space. It's not what people wanted, but it might be what they needed. And in that quiet shift, amid the ruins of speculation and the echoes of greed, a truth emerges, one that was buried for decades under market reports and glossy ads. A home was never meant to be a product. It was meant to be a place. As the camera pans over the city one last time, the skyline fades into the morning light. The outlines of towers, the hum of distant traffic, the sound of someone locking their door. Not in fear this time, but in peace. The last home still stands. And maybe that's enough to begin again.